Good evening all, and welcome. The brave military men and women of every nation often have many difficult things they need to do. This of course is compounded if some of the stuff they have to deal with is paranormal, which is what you're about to find out now. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here for 3 videos a week, as well as checking out our app for over 3,500 extra stories to listen to at your leisure. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mum was in the Air Force for 23 years, and this is what she told me. She was a medic and worked in hospitals, and worked at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany in the 90s, and she said there were a few areas of the hospital that had seen countless numbers of veteran patients and deaths where the faculty got really unwelcome vibes from, or where they'd see shadows or hear voices and footsteps. But this one time, she was in a certain wing of the hospital where she frequently worked, and she needed to go to the 4th floor, and she did so with a fellow airman since it was required that they travel in pairs, the buddy system. So they walked into the elevator, pressed 4, and oddly enough the elevator went past 4, then came back down and kept going up and down without ever opening the doors. Then when it finally opened on 4, they looked out into the open doors and saw a floor of the hospital that was completely unfamiliar. Now my mum knew this area inside and out, but said that it was a floor she had never seen before. It even looked like it could have been from a different period of time. It was completely empty. Her and her teammate didn't say anything or make a move to step out. I think they both felt that was wrong. Then the doors closed. The elevator skipped around a few more times, and then she came back to floor 4, and it was completely back to normal, the way they knew it to be. Her teammate said, "What just happened?" She replied with, "I dunno." And they never spoke of it to each other again. I used to work for the US Air Force munition system, code 2WOX1. Basically, I was just towing trailers back and forth all night. Well, one night I was alone checking a trailer behind our conventional munition shop before grabbing it and towing it away. The trailer was parked next to the fence, and I was on the side opposite the fence. As I moved my flashlight to check the tires, it caught my eyes outside the wire. So I swept the light up and looked up for 5 minutes, trying to figure out what I'd seen, thinking it was like a coyote or something since we were in New Mexico. I figure I must have spooked it, so I turned off my light, finished my hookup and left. The next day I'm talking to a buddy in conventional, and they tell me they found tracks all over behind the fence next to the building, and had to report it to the security forces, since there wasn't really a road back there or anything, as it's a secure area. Then the guy, who happened to be a Native American, tells me this story about skinwalkers and how they like to spy on people who are alone and take their souls and stuff. And I did the damnedest to never be alone there again. You know, with a base this size, there's native burial grounds that we bulldozed at some point, and definitely pissed something off. I was in Navy boot camp in Orlando. I was alone on watch in our company's barracks compartment. I was checking all of the windows because the CC liked to unlock 1 or 2 to make sure we checked them all. That put me between the racks, or bunk beds on the wall. I caught movement down the middle open area of the compartment. A flash of white. White shoes meant brand new recruits. We had been there long enough to know we were wearing our black Oxfords. I went between the racks to the middle so that I could see who had come into the compartment. The outside door definitely hadn't opened, and I would have heard the door by the inside stairwell. The door to the laundry area was locked. Standing across the open area, by the other row of racks, was a girl with dark curly hair, wearing the same female utilities as me, light blue shirt, black pants, and was wearing the white tennis shoes, which meant she'd been there only a few weeks. She looked at me and then she wasn't there. No place for her to go. We were in the middle of the compartment, yards from the door, and nowhere to hide. I didn't see her move. She was just there one moment and the next, gone. Only saw her for a heartbeat or 2. Spookier still, years later, someone was telling us about doing roving patrol watch at boot camp and how they kept finding a pair of white sneakers in the locked laundry room of an empty compartment. It freaked her out. They said that they would then put the shoes outside on the breezeway, then lock the door, but the shoes would be thumping in the dryer when they came back around. She said the red lights always looked darker in there. They'd do their checks and leave as fast as they could. They thought one of the CCs was playing a joke with the shoes. I asked which building, which wing, which floor, and it was my old compartment, exactly the same place I had seen that girl. My grandfather was a pilot in the Turkish Air Force way back, and being part of NATO, they sent them to Canada to attend Air Force Academy. Just to give you some context, he is very uptight and serious, often the reason being a soldier comes into play. He is the reason why I know a lot of astrophysics. He guided me to science and facts his entire life. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Anyway, he told me he and the rest of the school, including the flight instructors, witnessed a UFO hovering above the main building. He says it came too close to the ground and it was basically impossible not to notice. Then, just as baffled as people are, the UFO shot up straight almost instantly. Must be pulling G-force that would have easily killed a human being. I never saw a UFO with my own eyes. Every object I've ever seen in the sky had an easy explanation. Some took longer to realize, but now it comes to me very naturally. I'm a little skeptic about the whole aliens visiting Earth thing, but science says it's not impossible. Fermi's paradox can easily be solved. I also spoke with my mother, as it was her father, and she gave me a few more details that I can remember. It was during the winter of 1958, and after the meal my grandfather didn't like to talk about these things in general. Only after I pushed him hard did he spill more details, but I forgot some of them. Thanks, Mum. I was at Camp Leatherneck, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. We were leaving my room, which was a large room with 8 other guys, to head to the designated smoking area at around 10 p.m. It was dark and clear. I lit up my cigarette as I was passing through the T barriers, and when I got back on the other side I saw about 10 or so Marine/Army men looking up at the sky pointing. I looked up and saw 3 red dots in the sky, about the size of what you'd see on an aeroplane, but far apart in a triangle formation. So one light at each angle point. We're all looking up, and a second set of lights appear, a little to the left of this one. It was super weird, and at one point the lights from the first set get closer together, then apart again, then completely vanish. To this day, I don't know what it was. It was really cool to witness though. 2003 in Baghdad. My unit came in May, right after the initial push. We took over the compound that looked like an Iraqi base. Anyway, we were setting up sleeping quarters and my unit takes over the old medical building. We can clearly see blood on the stairs, and I'm not talking sprinkles. I'm talking puddles of blood from the unit that had come before us and clearly saw combat in there. A few days go by and I'm laying down on my cot, trying to sleep, when suddenly I feel someone stare at me. I look up and see a soldier that clearly wasn't American. It was an old Iraqi soldier just standing there in the middle of the room. I'm sure it wasn't just me being half asleep, because another one of my friends mentioned it a few days later. It was profoundly creepy. I'm in the Navy, and about 15 years ago I was standing watch in a submarine engine room. We were underway, and I can't for the life of me remember where to or from, or if we were just making circles. It was the mid-watch, and I sat down to catch up on some logs. That's when I heard a woman's voice. This was long before we had women on subs, and felt the hairs on my neck stand straight up. I got up and looked around to find the others, who were all talking or doing their daily tasks. I thought maybe I had dozed off and dreamt it. I sat back down and heard it again, and it sounded like it was coming from outside the hatch I was sitting under. I said screw this out loud, and went to just be around the other guys on watch. I still get chills just thinking about it now. This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he was stationed at an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when they came through, the base shut down and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all buildings you attached to a person with carabiners, so if there was a sudden whiteout, you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months, every time they locked down for weather, they would hear horrendous screaming outside. Everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate, and they wrote it off as an animal. However, every time it was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time, a 1,000-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals nor people were ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. And then one day, it just stopped. This was not something that they just shrugged off at all. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and CIA to fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists, and they came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was going on. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father, but this is the only spooky type of story he has from his 22 years of service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in either way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't some grease monkey scratching their heads and randomly guessing. As I said, I spoke to my mum. These are the things that I missed. After one of these occasions, the U-2 in the shop had all of its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were specially built for this airframe and this particular cruise mission. The systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting buttons and flipping switches and stuff. Another time, 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was wind because it came in short, irregular bursts, and winds never produced these sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, Control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on, but they were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner. It's creepy, bizarre, and may or may not be supernatural. I'll leave that down to your own judgment. I was in the Navy and did 6 months in the Mediterranean. I saw a lot of empty boats, but also small boats full of people and other refugee-related events. The one thing that will always stand out, though, was the day we cruised past a dead body. It 100% looked like nothing I'd ever seen in a movie. It was like cottage cheese wearing clothes. I assume given the region that the person's skin was much darker before they passed. After death, they were severely bloated and white. Had they not had shorts and a shirt on, I'd have never recognized this as a person. I've also been on Liberty in Greece and passed dead bodies on the beach. The desperation of the refugees to cross the sea, I swear, is something else. A buddy of mine was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, in the Ortiz. It was a regular day full of standard base activity, indoors and out, when the sirens went off, followed by a warning for all staff to report to the base's mess hall. My friend and everyone else were quite confused but followed orders. Upon arrival at the hall, they found it was full of the base staff, with a uniformed officer taking roll. The base commander settled everyone down. and advised them that everyone was just taking a short break, that there was nothing to worry about, and that everyone would be back to work shortly. Everyone sat at the long lunch table scratching their heads and discussing what could be up. This particular room in the hall was interior and had no windows. Once the roll was completed and everyone accounted for, the commander left and soldiers carrying automatic rifle closed the doors to the hall and stood inside them at attention, essentially stopping anyone from leaving. This raised the chatter quite a bit, but nobody panicked. Only a few minutes later, an incredibly loud engine sound could be heard approaching the base, as whatever was making the noise sounds lands, and it shook the entire island. Framed photos fell off the walls and trophies in glass cases are shaken over. The engine hum and shaking then cease. Chatter again rises sharply, as speculation about what the hell is going on increases. After about an hour, the noise starts up again, and the island shakes again, and whatever it was takes off and quickly fades. Shortly after, the base's commander enters and says everyone can get back to work, warning them not to discuss today's break and simply forget about it. When I asked him what he thought it was, he immediately suggested that it was some sort of classified skunk weapon spy plane, maybe the Aurora needing to land for emergency repairs or refueling. Of course, he said, since they kept us all from seeing it, we'll truly never know. We were stationed in Okinawa. Oh man, it's a goldmine of stuff. Driving through a tunnel coming back from Churimari Aquarium, I woke up to my friends freaking out. There was this phantom moped that zipped by with this girl on the back, and she left a trail of long flowing black hair like the Grudge ghost, oily looking flowing hair. I thought I was dazed, but we talked about it the next day. I think the story was some girl was kidnapped by guys on mopeds driving through the tunnel when they crashed, construction or another car, and I think they were decapitated or something terrible. Also, I thought I saw a ghost in my room and some other areas. I drank a lot back then, so I passed it off. Cadena was rumored to have a lot of ghosts, Gate 3 I think. I thought it was just an excuse to keep it closed. They also have a bunch of buildings which are allegedly haunted that they still use. I think one of the marine bases supposedly has the ghost of a samurai run up and down the streets. Just Google Haunted Okinawa and you'll find a bunch of stories. They were good times. Former USGC here. I saw a ghost and some creepy stuff happen when we were removing the old Fresnel lens from the Presque Isle light in Michigan. Also, I've seen some weird and creepy lights in St. Elmo's Fire near the old Washango light. Compasses and radios all quit, radar and GPS wouldn't work either. The light near Sturgeon Bay is haunted as well, and we stayed at the light near Two Rivers, and the whole family saw the ghost. There are several lights in the Great Lakes that are open to active reserve and retired military members as vacation rentals. We stayed at Rawley Point Lighthouse and the Sherwood Point Lighthouse. They have visitor logs that now look like a diary, and multiple stories in there are about the hauntings, dating back to at least the 70s. I know that Sherwood Point, at the very least, is quite haunted. When I was in Israel, I saw something. My folks and I were chilling about 10 p.m. enjoying the cool evening looking at stars when they became obscured by a giant black triangular shape that passed over. I said, "What the hell is that?" We all looked and waved, and it spotlighted the entire city block as if to say hello back. Or was it getting a better look at us? It made a quiet hum as it passed and turned west, moving very slowly. I worked in Arlington National Cemetery while I was in the army. The tomb guard always talked about seeing or just hearing soldiers marching some nights. We were cataloging graves one night when I thought I saw a soldier in my team up ahead, so I called over to him. He answered from behind me. When I looked back, the other soldier was gone. I'm a skeptic, and I believe everything paranormal has a real-world explanation. but I'm still trying to figure that one out. I was taking my shift in the guard tower at our fire base in Afghanistan one clear night. Through my night vision, I saw something hovering above an LP/OP we had about a kilometer from our base. It appeared to have lights on the edges of a triangular craft, and it looked like it was dropping flares over the guys. However, without the night vision, I couldn't see the craft or the flares at all. I radioed in, and they said that they couldn't see anything. The craft and the flares then vanished. I also saw a very large circular craft without lights pass over FOB Ghazni that was being chased by a bunch of choppers, and a guy that glowed when viewed through my night vision stepped into a bush in an empty field and vanished. I grew up in an old Victorian-era boarding house in Ivor, South Carolina. Everything about that town and house and its surrounding area is just creepy. We saw and felt all kinds of weirdness in there, but that's only the beginning of my experiences. Hot spots, cold spots, apparition of a man who looked like he was dressed in a suit and a fedora, who always was with a young woman who was wearing a dress like an old schoolteacher from when the house used to be a boarding house, and the ghosts of people that had been lynched from an old pecan tree in my backyard. I'm used to seeing some messed up stuff at this point, and that's only part of it. Fast forward to 2014. I was enlisted into the US Navy and got assigned TAD to USS Sturret in between my A and C schools. I was coming back to the ship one night, and I see someone aloft. That's not right, no one's supposed to be aloft at night, but somebody's probably got an okay from it somewhere, so whatever. I see them walking around, then I get up to the brow, look up, and see no one. Guess they went in already. Didn't think anything about it, and the next morning we go underway. I went up to the smoke deck late one night, on that underway, and on my way there I see the upper half of a guy's face. I could see coveralls with his second-class crows visible through the porthole window of one of the airlock doors that you go through to go outside. I make eye contact and shuffle over to let him in. He shuffled over too. Okay, I'll open it, guy, whatever. I open it, look around but don't see him. Maybe he went for another cigarette. I climb up there and see some other people in the dark, faces occasionally lit by the cherry from their cigarette, but I don't see the guy. I ask if anyone saw someone come up, because there was a guy that was about to hop through the airlock but didn't. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. You saw him too, huh? Yeah, of course I did, I say. Is the guy here or what? Do we need to call man overboard? No, he's dead. Maybe not if we don't turn this around. No, another guy goes. I mean, he hung himself. What? Apparently, he was a Control 2 that got into a love triangle that went bad and he couldn't deal. So yeah, that happened. I was told to come over here and look up by one of the guys, and was shown the exact light he hung himself from. Apparently sometimes you can see him walking around there at night, and you always feel the cold spot right there. And I was shown where. Screw me. Anything else I ought to know, I asked? Yeah, let me show you Andrew Sterrett's sword. It'll always shock you though, no matter how many times you touch it. Or if you touch something metal beforehand. Apparently he killed a kid with it. Yeesh. Oh, you're a sonar tech, right? Yeah, man, I'm in our dive right now, but yeah. Okay, go ask Chief Moon about the skid. I think she's in sonar right now anyway. Okay, I'll bite. I head back down and go to the sonar room. Chief Moon was there and I ask her about the skid. Ah, hell no, that place freaks me out. Okay, but why? What's the story? I want to know. Well, I went down there one time to get pressure readings because I was an STG-1 at the time and was on duty. I saw a guy standing in the corner, back facing the ladder. I asked if he was okay and he didn't reply, so I booked it. Screw that. I never went down there at night. But wasn't somebody just messing with you? It sure as hell wasn't anyone that I recognized, so you tell me. And that's why I stay the hell off there. I left a bit after that, and figured that I'd check up on the skids anyway to see for myself. I got down there, and when I touched the hatch, I felt the same weirdness from when I was a kid, and I went in anyway. Cut on the light and didn't see anything, but still felt that something was off. Everybody else that I asked said that down there is creepy, and they don't go anywhere near it unless they really have to. Those are just a few things I saw there. My old ship, USS Princeton, chased a UFO off once, off the coast of Baja, and I saw some sort of submerged disc thing on sonar once. That, and any time that we'd go over shipwrecks, I would get a weird feeling out on the smoke deck. Anyway, that's enough for now. I've got to get back to work. I'm an Air Force member. At my old base, McChord Air Force Base, there is a building known as the Castle, and it is the main hub for the base. I worked there for 4 years, and I experienced something on 2 occasions. The first, I had stayed up late to finish some work and emails, and I was the last one in the office. From down the hall I heard talking that sounded like my supervisor and another airman speaking. I walked down that way on my way out to say bye, and as I turned the corner the talking stopped and no one was there. I hightailed it out of there. The second happened at my desk. I had gone in on a weekend to work on a project, and while sitting at my desk I heard a male's voice whisper out, "Get out," into my ear. I was completely alone, and I have never been more freaked out in my life. I never worked in that office again. I was stationed while in the Navy at El Centro, California. I was part of the Auxiliary Security Forces back then for a few years. One night, during force protection drills, which we were required to man the base as if we were being attacked, wearing that huge Darth Vader-like blue brain bucket along with your best friend's sidearm M16 and other LARPing-like gear. I got lucky and stood an 8-hour watch with a friend. As we were patrolling the water treatment section of the base, we started hearing what appeared to be drums or war drums in the distance coming from the north. This base is in the middle of nowhere, so we chalked it up to machinery echoes at 3 a.m. Right? While we were roving back south, we could hear it coming from the south, so we stopped and started to watch the south and west side of the base because it appeared to be following us. So we radioed dispatch for assistance as the drums started sounding louder and closer. A single unit showed up with a DoD civilian police officer and an actual master of arms and pointed all their SUV lights towards the area where it appeared the noise was coming from. We waited about 20 minutes before silence came over. Right after that, the drum beats re-emerged from the north side. We freaked out a little bit, but at this point we just went back to kicking rocks while the unit went to investigate. We started putting 2 and 2 together and just let it go. It wasn't every night you could hear it, and it was mostly random. The following story takes place in Fort Dix, New Jersey. My aunt, grandmother, and also my mother, uncle, and grandfather, when they were all alive, all claimed there was something demonic there, especially in and around the officer housing. Apparently, a mess of officers didn't want to stay in the provided houses, and the enlisted asked if they could swap. Grandpa was enlisted and heard about this, and moved himself and his family into one of the houses. Everyone claims that even in the summer, the house wouldn't get above the low 60s. The brightest light bulbs would hardly provide much light, and the dog refused to go into the basement, and the cat litter pans would be flipped. My mother swore she would see shadow people watching her from around corners, and my aunt had one push her while she was in the shower. My uncle had the choice to either have the entire basement to himself or the small office as his bedroom, and he picked the first option. He began sleeping in the living room after getting his feet grabbed when he would go down the basement steps. He mentioned after having a fight with Grandpa that something kept pushing its fingers into his bruises, and he woke up with more cuts and scrapes than he went to bed with. Everyone would always have some sort of scratch or bruise that they didn't remember getting. Grandma and Grandpa mentioned knowing that it was going on, but tried to continue on without acknowledging it. Last year I was roughly 50 miles off the coast of New York, and I saw one extremely bright light in the sky which I assumed was a light from the shore. When it dawned on me that it didn't make sense due to how far offshore was, I grabbed the binoculars for a closer look. Crazy thing was, I could not figure out if this was 2 miles or 20 miles away. It looked like a giant, burning ball in the sky, wasn't very high, and I just knew it wasn't a plane. I thought maybe some military flare exercise, but ruled that out because it was not descending. After about 5 to 10 minutes of trying to figure out what the damn thing was, it was gone. Just myself and one other guy were standing there, watching on the bridge. It was around 3 to 4 a.m. We were so confused and stunned when it was just gone. It didn't burn up or slowly fade, just flat out disappeared. I am a Canadian Army officer. I work in a garrison that's been around for a while. It has actually been in service since before World War II. In one of the old hangars, which is now demolished, there used to be airplanes there. We had our mess, bars where we would grab a drink, and in the officers' mess, there was a Bible, a very old Bible, that no one knew exactly where it came from, but it looked old. Everyone that has worked around that Bible has heard or seen weird stuff. It started with the following routine. Every once in a while, we would find this old Bible thrown around in a complete mess. The Bible, which was next to 2 other more recent ones, would be in a glass display which was in a locker. We found it super weird, but there's a civilian airport literally next to our base, so we thought maybe the vibrations or airplanes caused this. We even changed the direction of the camera to try and catch if someone was messing with the Bible, but we never saw anything. Then one day we had to do some renos, and there were these huge cylindrical paper towers, very, very heavy, and for some reason I can't quite remember, we left the 3 Bibles on the top of one of the cylinders. Well, the day after the cylinders were down, they were thrown, and the Bibles were thrown not far from where the cylinders fell. I'm talking 6'1" cylinders, and that cylinder was heavy as hell. In another occurrence, there were 2 female NCOs working near the stand, where the Bible was, with 2 others on a Tuesday night shift. The floor was made of a kind of old wood/plastic, which our boots made it very easy to know where someone was coming. So the 2 girls, Master Corporal and a Corporal, were in different rooms. The Master Corporal was focused when she suddenly hears boots running right next to her, close to the door entrance. Of course, the light was low. The building was very old and never had great lighting. She turned super fast and asked the corporal if it was her, that she just passed next to her. She yelled in the other room that it wasn't. No need to say that they left the building really fast. There have been a lot of occurrences like that. There's even a captain that refused to touch it and made privates move it instead. The building was demolished maybe 3 years ago now, and we never heard back from that devilish book. My old barrack room in the Marines was a living nightmare. I have a lot of stories from it, but I want to share this first occurrence. So I was stationed on Camp Pendleton at the time, and grew up near there, so I'd often go and see my parents at their house on weekends, and even some weeknights. If I went home, then I'd wake up at around 4:30 to 5 in the morning, and drive back to base for PT. If I got there early with time to spare, I'd take a quick nap in the barracks room. This was one of those mornings. I shared the barracks room with a roommate, but he was home on leave at the time. Anyway, I was napping in my room when I felt someone shake me awake. I sat up in bed a little confused because my very first thought was that my mum was shaking me awake at home because I'd overslept. But I was in my barrack room, so I just kind of brushed it off and laid back down. I was laying on my side with my back to the wall. Shortly after I closed my eyes, I felt something sit on the edge of the bed in front of my feet. I thought my brains must have been playing tricks on me, when I felt this thing get up, walk around the bed, and sit behind my feet. So, it's now sitting between my feet and the wall. I'm very creeped out. I'm still laying there wide awake, but eyes closed, not really reacting. The thing then starts crawling up the bed, like I'm feeling the bed indenting as their hands and knees move upwards. In my head, I'm telling myself to let it get to your head and see what happens. But it gets to my belly button, I freak out. I throw my hand over there and flip the light on, trying to rationalize it, thinking it's a cat or a rat. But of course there's nothing. So I just take off and drive to the parking lot, where I have a nap in my car instead. I spent about 6 years in the Navy and had quite a few odd paranormal experiences while there. I lived in 2 different barracks while I was there and had friends in another building. All 3 of them had weird goings on. The first one was in a room shared with one other girl. My bed was against the left-hand wall, and on the right-hand wall were the doors to the bathroom and a double set of closets with mirrors on the doors. I remember waking up more than once that night to see what I thought was the dark outline of a shadow in the mirror, sort of standing close to the bed. On other nights I could see a shadowy figure moving in the bathroom. The second building was much nicer. I had a room to myself but shared a joint kitchen and bathroom with the other person. Though I didn't see anything in that place, she and I could both hear things moving around the other person's room when there shouldn't have been anyone there. And no, it wasn't the cockroaches, though we did find some gnarly big boys dead in the bathroom. The third building was one in which a couple of friends lived. They both did not know each other, but confided to me separately that they had eerily similar dreams of something that lived in the walls and would tap against them. Both of them claimed to have seen shadows moving around their room. So one of the buildings that I worked out of was the only remaining wing of what had been, back in the day, the Naval Hospital Pearl Harbor. Way back when it was first constructed, it was this huge building with 2 long wings several stories high and a gnarly basement. Now it's just one dilapidated building in a parking lot. Knowing that it was a hospital in Pearl Harbor, I'm sure you can piece together the history. But let me elaborate. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was used as triage and as a morgue. Several hundred bodies were brought there within the first several hours alone, for later identification and burial. 960 casualties passed through on that one day. And fast forward to now, there is a 24/7 watch stood up in the building, and that includes the usual stuff, sitting at the desk, answering phones, going on roves, which is all well and good until it's after hours, and only you and a few other people are left in the building, and you're the sad little E3, E4 who has to rove alone. You'd be the only one in that specific part of the building, and would hear footsteps, muffled voices, and get really uncomfortable feelings of being watched. People complained about getting their hair tugged in the basement. In the hour span between 2 roves, I once had the shower in the basement male locker room turn on. I heard voices, disembodied coughing, the footsteps, cold spots in weird places, a horrible feeling of being watched, and after that I never used a specific drinking fountain, and I found out later that it was a problem area, and a lot of people had a similar feeling too. There was also the time that I was locked in the bathroom by a phantom. That was fun. There are also some buildings on Ford Island, which are definitely creepy. I think what makes it worse is that they are abandoned, and a lot of the buildings still have damage that was never repaired. Though I have to say the spookiest thing that happened to me on Ford Island was when my dad visited. We were driving around and he insisted on stepping out of the car near the brig, you know, for the photo op. Our buildings were haunted. Now I say buildings and not building, because I managed to spend minimum 1 night in every barracks at basic training, due to a string of really unfortunate injuries that have nothing to do with this story. We heard voices during lights out. You could hear someone going up and down the central stairway. It was 3 stories, and it would echo like hell. Upon inspection, there was nothing out there. Our stuff would also move about. One of the lads had his inspection out on an empty bed, and by morning it had all been thrown around the room. I would have suspected our corporals, but normally the damage was localized within your specific area. This was all over the room. I've got to say the weirdest one for me was when I saw a guy walking up the stairs as I was coming back from a smoke at 2 a.m. I called out to him and ran up to catch him up, and he just vanished. No doors open, nothing, just simply gone. I didn't recognize them, and they didn't have the standard number 2 all over haircut, so it definitely wasn't one of our lads. Who knows? This happened to my dad a number of years ago. He has since passed away, but this story is one that I always remember in my mind as being the one that gave him the most chills. He didn't tell it often, but when he did, and it usually required alcohol for him to do so, it would always give him a look that I rarely ever saw in him. A true and profound fear that we as a family rarely ever saw, and a particular vulnerability that was very unlike my father. But now, onto the story. My dad was working in the army. I can't say where, I don't know if I can now. In any case, he never said specifically where. This must have been at least 50 years ago. He was on patrol on some rural area of the base. He was led to believe and understand that the area had previously been somewhat inhabited. The land was repurposed as a base, and the subsequent houses in the rural vicinity were either destroyed or just left. I think there were about 3 houses that were in the woods which were already overgrown and abandoned by the time the base was got, where it was considered too much work to go about bringing them down. So they were left there, as edicts to what came before. My dad was doing a patrol one night in the dark. He said it must have been past midnight, and he was by himself, on a little vehicle, making sure that everything was in order. He was relatively bored and just listening to the sound of nature, when suddenly he spots something out in the woods. He jumps off his vehicle and shines a flashlight towards the woods, where he clearly sees something move. He radios in to say that he's seen movement, and he starts making his way closer. He sees and hears footsteps and movement, the swish of a robe, it seems. My dad walks near to one of these old houses, and he illuminates the house. He doesn't see anyone inside, but now the intruder, or person, is gone. He makes his way towards the house, which he had never done before, and is feeling a bit apprehensive. Even though theoretically there should be no one there, it still gives him the creeps. He opens the door, which was unlocked, and shouts out to reveal themselves and that they were trespassing. But there is no noise whatsoever. He looks around the house, the musty smell invading his nose, and his ears only being filled with the footsteps he himself makes in this sinister house. It's very small. He clears every room downstairs and starts making his way up these thin, rickety wooden steps, which he was dubious would hold his weight, but he needed to do a thorough inspection, as protocol demanded. When he reached the top of the stairs, he noticed there were 3 small rooms. He went into each of them in turn, and upon the last room saw a small ladder and an attic leading up to it. He had a really bad feeling. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, and he really didn't want to go up those stairs. But he knew he must. So, up he went. One of the stair rungs actually broke under his feet on his way up, which nearly gave him a heart attack, but he soldiered on. When he made it to the top, he shined his flashlight all around, and as expected, heard and saw nothing. Just a few old children's toys and sheets and stuff, nothing of real interest. He did see something though. Maybe there could be someone hidden behind the sheet. The attic was quite small, and so he made his way in and pulled back the sheet to reveal nothing. Satisfied with his search, he made his way back down out of the house. He hadn't got any response via radio yet, which he thought was odd, but brushed it off and made his way back to the vehicle. Just as the keys were entering the ignition, did he hear something again? He looked over, and swore he saw a shadow move. He shined his flashlight in the general direction and saw that again. It was heading towards the house. This time he ran, convinced he was going to catch whatever or whoever it was. He ran, but when he reached the house, it was gone. He used his flashlight to shine all around the house, not wanting or thinking he should go in, seeing as the door hadn't made a sound as it squeaked like hell the first time he entered. When he'd pretty much done a whole lap of the house, he decided to give it up. He wasn't sure what it was and thought that it would be best to leave this to someone else. Just as he was rounding the house to go towards his vehicle, did he hear a light tap on the glass of one of the windows. He knew something bad was about to happen. He said he could feel a distinct chill in the air as he twisted his head slowly, and his eyes saw red eyes in the window. It wasn't so much the eyes themselves, but the dark shadow of what appeared to be a body, absolutely towering over him. It was behind the window, at least 8 feet tall. As you imagine, my dad promptly crapped himself and ran as fast as he could to the vehicle and drove all the way back. He told absolutely no one this story. It took him a number of years before he even shared it with us. But a few years after, while out with a few drinks with a few colleagues of his, did one of them bring up the abandoned properties. They asked the usual questions about if anyone had been in one, and my dad piped up. He said he thought he once saw something while doing an inspection, but it turned out to be nothing. One of the members of the group went silent, and then asked, "Did you see the eyes? Were they red?" The others in the group didn't know what they were talking about. Something in the house, perhaps? And my dad looked him square in the eyes and just nodded. The nod was so much more than a nod, charged with comprehension and understanding that they had shared in the same disturbing experience. They never spoke any more about it, but my dad admits that it was something truly disturbing and never inspected any abandoned properties again. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. A truly chilling set of tales. If you enjoyed these stories or have any that you would wish to share, feel free to send me an email or follow the link in the description. I'd like to thank everyone who gave me permission to narrate these and to all my members and patrons. You guys really do mean the world to me, so thank you. The video was a lot of fun to make. Really fun researching and going through the threads and listening and reading all the individual accounts. You know, sometimes when I try and get these permissions, I find stories that I really, really love and they never get back to me, so I never get to read them for all of you. I'm starting to think that maybe if a story is really, really good, I should just make a big document on, like, further reading, so you can just read it yourselves, because I'm not allowed to. But I think it'd be good. Anyway, guys, just a huge thanks for watching. It really does mean the world to me, and I seriously hope you did like today's stories. I am going to sign off for now, though, but stay awesome, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.